Hello, everybody, and welcome to Catching Up with Web Performance, a podcast about stories of people and web performance. Today, my very special guest is Tammy Everts. Tammy, how's it going?
Hey, it's going really well, Tanner, actually. I don't know when you're going to release this podcast, but for me, it's like the week before Christmas, or the week and a bit before Christmas. So feeling Christmassy.
Well, Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, all the things. Is there any Santa Claus stuff sitting in the background of the house right now?
Oh, probably. Yeah, my office turns into Santa's workshop over the holiday. It's like, where can we hide this? It's like, oh, put it in here. So it's a little bit nutty right now.
Oh, man. Well, then, speaking of gifts, I would love my request from Santa this year is if I can have the gift of your story. I would love to know. Yeah, great segue. So, Tammy, like this web performance thing, what is it and how did you get into it?
I don't know if I can answer the first question easily. The second question, we can start there. So my background is not in performance at all. I'm not a developer. I'm not an engineer. I am a person with an undergrad degree in English literature and a graduate degree in publishing. And I did my master's. Yeah, I did my master's back in the late 90s. And I decided to specialize in digital publishing, as we called it then. And I was strongly dissuaded from doing this by my thesis advisor, who thought that the web was a fad and that I was totally just going down the wrong, down the wrong alley. Like strongly, I can't tell you how vehemently he tried to persuade me.
What'd you say back?
I said, I feel good about it though. So I kind of just persevered.
I have a hunch.
Did my master's in digital publishing. I'm really glad that I did. And so from there, I basically started working for a web agency and kind of just do it was the early days of the web, and the whole web agency model. And so they just knew that they wanted kind of a content person. And I'm going to do air quotes a lot because a lot of what I say feels ridiculous to me. So that's how I signify it. So I was the content person. And what that kind of turned into was words on the page, beyond design, how the pages related to each other. So I basically kind of taught myself how to do information architecture as we did it back in the day, taught myself how to set up a usability lab in our agency, leaned heavily on the resources of Jacob Nielsen and the Nielsen Norman Group for just kind of a lot of practical things. And a lot of people kind of in my generation, just really self-taught. Yeah. So with that experience behind me in, I want to say 2009, I was kind of contacted by a friend, a former coworker, who was like, I work for this company called Strange Loop and we do web performance optimization. And those were all just gibberish to me. I did not know what that meant at all. But they were like, we need a content person. So I was like, okay, I know those words. I'm familiar with that request. So I went in and chatted with them. And that was kind of the first time I encountered the idea that site speed mattered in any kind of fundamental business way. Intuitively, I'm a human being and I've been annoyed by slow websites and, I had a lot of experience of being annoyed by slow websites. But just this idea that there was some business value attached to that and there were things that you could do to make that better was brand new to me because my usability testing experience was very lab oriented. So we weren't testing for speed. We had all the sites were blazing fast or the prototypes or whatever we were using. So that just never came into bearing. So we would build these websites and kind of push them out in my previous, career and kind of be like, okay, well there, your website's done. And so this was brand new. So I kind of just learned on the job at Strange Loop and kind of in other places that I worked. I worked at Strange Loop was acquired by Radware. And then I moved over to Sosta. I worked with a lot of great people there. Sosta has now been acquired by Apple. It's very, obviously it's tech, so things move around. And now I work for not Strange Loop, another company.
We've come full circle.
Speed Curve, not a Strange Loop, a Speed Curve. So I work at Speed Curve, and I've worked here for the past 5 years. Yeah. So that's my long answer to your question.
Well, no, I feel like you brought that in pretty compact.
Oh, good. Okay.
There's so many things though to pull out here. Let's just start with the gibberish because this fascinates me. I love talking to people who know absolutely nothing about web performance. Can you go back to Well, you said this is 2009.
Mhm.
We hit Strange Loop, and they say, "Come write content. Come write web performance content
Yeah.
for us." And you were like, "What that? What is web perform? I don't know what to do." Like, do you remember that moment, or like, did
Oh
they say
yeah.
web performance over the call, or when was it that you had to actually write a
Uh,
web perf article?
so web performance was right, like their tools were called WPO, web performance optimization tools, and you don't really hear those terms anymore. So that was like right there in the name from the beginning.
Mhm.
And it was in the blog that I helped create, Web Performance Today, which people who've been around for a long time might have encountered. And we had a podcast called Web Performance Today podcast. And yeah, another
More
web.
podcasts.
So that was always there in the name. Some other terms that were really new to me, and again, I had to learn on the job, were just like what is optimization?
Mhm.
Um, learning how to use web page tasks kind of in the very early days of web page test. That was one of the first things that I was taught. And kind of coming full circle, like Speed Curve is built on a forked instance of web page test where we've got a lot of our own bells and whistles.
Yeah.
So it's like, that was a really good thing to know. Um, how to read a waterfall chart.
Mhm.
So that was, yeah. And, I fortunately, I worked with really, really great people like Joshua Bixby, who's at Fastly, and Huma Heshti, who's also at Fastly now. And they were really great about teaching me kind of everything they knew. And there was like no question was too stupid. And it was fantastic. So, I think that's kind of one of the nice things about this community is that it's very open to explaining things.
Yeah. Tell
Because
me about it.
there's a lot to explain. I mean, those are early days and it's gotten a lot more complicated since then. Like
Yeah.
the metrics glossary that I used to rely on in 2009, 2010, which was like start render, load time, backend time,
Right.
it seems so easy and basic compared to all the metrics that we're looking at now. So it's a lot.
Yeah. I guess I'm so interested in what you're interested in because you have this. Gosh, how long is this now? We're hitting over. You've been doing this over a decade.
Yeah.
Are there highlight moments or things like what has kept you going this long in web performance, and what are some of the things that excite you or interest you?
Um, That's a really good question. It's something that I kind of come back to a lot. At the end of the day, I don't really care about technology for technology's sake. And I used to be really kind of shy about sharing that. And now I'm like just shouting it off the rooftops, like, I don't care about tech.
Right.
I love the internet. I love, content. I like everything that the internet does for me. The mechanics of how the internet works are kind of like, you've got my attention for maybe like 2 minutes and then I'm going to just start drifting off.
Mm-hmm.
What I'm interested in and what I really find web performance is a kind of a fascinating way to study this is how people actually engage with the internet, how people engage with websites, what the internet does to our brains. So it's not
Mm-hmm.
just how we use the internet, it's kind of how the internet shapes us. So some of the research that I participated in over the years, so kind of back in my Strange Loop and Radware days, um, I was really lucky in that I got to direct some research projects where we did things like they're a little bit harken back to what I used to do in my usability testing days, where we got people in lab settings
Well,
and tested things like throttling their network connection and seeing how they behaved, putting EEG headsets on people and
yeah.
getting them to perform tasks on slowed down websites and doing actual like A/B testing in these types of environments. So you could see, if you have two cohorts of people who are given the same tasks on the same websites, and some of them have a slower experience, and you kind of aggregate the data that we get from the EEG headsets for each group, and then you overlay them. What are the differences? What are the anomalies? And seeing, everything that you kind of think or if it feels true to you about how people use the web or how people feel when sites are slow, you can actually have a visual representation of this. Like,
Mm.
when like we can, because the EEG data kind of mapped to the timeline of how people were going through their whole user path,
Mhm.
you could see how frustration actually spiked in their EEG data when the pages got slow and on
That's
specific
interesting.
pages. like on checkout or things like that. So you actually getting to see what's going on with people. So you kind of realize this isn't something you have control over. Like, I'm not a Zen master who can kind of like, control my sine waves through all stressful experiences. Like
Mhm.
when
I'm a
something's
human
frustrating.
being.
Yeah, exactly. I have a human reaction and it's hardwired and it is what it is. Yeah, I can take some deep breaths and, go to my happy place, but that doesn't scale.
Yeah.
So that was really, really interesting to kind of we did a few of those studies
Yeah.
and doing exit interviews with people who sorry, I'm going on and on because this is
No,
really interesting
this is
stuff for
why
me.
we're here, Tammy. This is why we're here. Keep going
Oh
on and
yeah, I
on.
meant to go on and on. Okay, good, good, good. Okay. So yeah, so doing exit interviews with people as well, where and I should make clear that we were never telling people that they were part of a speed experiment.
What
They
did you
didn't
tell them?
know that we told them that we were just doing regular usability testing. So we just wanted them to
Mm.
do specific tasks for us and
Mhm.
let us know how they felt about the website and issues with doing the task.
Yeah.
So in no way did speed come into play as something that we discussed with
We
them.
weren't priming them for
So
this. We're just saying, come in and click some things and tell me how easy it was, maybe.
yeah, tell us how that felt for you. And one of the things that was really telling was when we did exit interviews, which is pretty standard for usability testing. You just do exit interviews with people where you just kind of get their general impressions after you've done all the tracking during the course of their using the site. Was we said, well, what were your impressions of the site?
Uh-huh.
And we took the words that the people in the fast cohort used, the adjectives they used, and threw them into one of those like word cloud generator
Yeah.
thingies. And we took all the adjectives that the people in the slow group used and put them in the word cloud generator thingy. And what came out of those word clouds, and I have like visuals I can send you. They're really, really
Yes,
cool.
please.
Where the word cloud for the frustrated people, the people with the slow experience, were huge, like compared to the other ones. Like they wanted to talk more. And the words that they used, some of them kind of said like, "Oh, it felt sluggish and slow," which was interesting that they picked up on that because they had no baseline to compare it to. They
Right.
only got the slow experience.
Yeah.
But they also said things like, "Oh, the navigation felt clunky. The design felt like inelegant."
It's the
Like,
same experience.
same
The
same
only thing you
website.
changed was the speed.
Yeah, the sites and tasks were exactly the same, but the things that they were critical of were design, usability, navigation, structure, like content. They thought it was boring. So it's just really interesting how when something's slow, you just get more critical
Yeah.
overall. So that was really interesting. And that was with a fairly large study group. I think we had like 50 people
Mm.
that we tracked and kind of aggregated their data. So yeah, really interesting stuff. So it's kind of nice to have that foundation to really feel like when we're coming into using monitoring tools like SpeedCurve or other tools and
Mm.
telling people like, yeah, you really do need to be paying attention to this and trying to make your sites faster and all this stuff matters, is to feel like, yeah, it really matters on a very fundamental level.
Right. And it feels like, too, it can spin off in so many strange indirect effects. They said it was boring. It had nothing to do with the speed. It was just what? Now they
Yeah.
have this completely
Oh, and
different
they said the
perception of
design was
information.
tacky. That was another word that came up. Tacky.
Yes. Oh, wow.
Mhm.
That's fascinating. Are there any other things that surprised you during these studies or during this time?
Um, I mean, that was kind of I would say if I had to like draw on the research that I've done, the correlation between speed and like tackiness and sluggishness and design and everything like that was probably the most surprising. Um, I think one of the things that I find really interesting, I don't know if it's surprising, is again, I keep going back to Nielsen Norman Group research because I think they do a
Yeah.
really good job of studying these things. And I think that people in the UX community are very familiar with their research, but people in the performance community, maybe not so much. So, one of the things that they do is they revisit, like every 10 years or so, what are people's expectations in terms of how they perceive page speed and what their feeling is.
Yeah.
And they have kind of this set of thresholds where, like, anything under 100 milliseconds feels instantaneous, under, 500 milliseconds feels pretty fast, and so on, all the way up to 10 seconds. And then after 10 seconds, there's like a big kind of context shift for people, and it's really hard. They're shifting focus, and it's really hard for them to get back on task. And what I like about the fact that they keep doing this and revisiting these old assumptions is that the takeaways are always the same. These thresholds don't change for people. And so it kind of speaks to the fact that we don't learn to take a kind of a different attitude or have different expectations of sight speed. Like our reactions are hardwired, probably to do with the fact that we've only been using computers for about 30 years. And as opposed to everything that we did as human beings for the tens, hundreds of thousands of years before that, where you had to do everything quickly. Like, it was like, I'm going to go and, stab a stegosaurus. I know that we didn't have stegosauruses back then, but.
That's going to be my new favorite example. So you remember the time you had to stab a stegosaurus? Yeah, that's why we need websites to be fast.
I'm just making sure people are still paying attention. So everything that we had to do, out in the fields, out hunting and gathering, doing all the things that human beings needed to do is our flow activities. This is what we're designed to do. And we, a lot of people, maybe not everybody, is familiar with the idea of flow that's been kind of popularized over the last little while in general, that you need a certain amount of flow activity in your life on a daily basis to be happy. Right. And if you don't have that, that's not good. But if you use the internet a lot, especially on your phone or with a, choppy connection or something like that, you're having like the opposite of flow. You're having
real quick to backtrack, hit me with flow. What is this thing?
Okay. It's so the idea of flow, and I'm not going to try to pronounce his last name.
Is this peacefulness? Am I get in the zone? Is
no, it's a researcher. Wait a second. I'm going to pull up. This is the handy thing of it having, his first name is Mihail.
You're going to try and pronounce his last name? Hang on. I'm going to see if I can do it.
No, I'm not. Okay.
All right. Let's see.
So it's Mihaly. And no, I'm not going to pronounce his last name. Mihaly, and his last name starts with a C. Oh, there you go. Oh, you were trolling me.
Hey, that's all I do here. We're how many episodes? This is like 15 episodes in, and I just don't want anybody to know what I know. Mm-hmm. I want to not know anything. I'm here to ask the dumb questions and to keep you talking.
And try to make me pronounce things I can't pronounce. But basically he's a psychologist, and he kind of identified and popularized this idea of flow as being something that we actually need. And so, this is a measurable human need. And so the flip side of that, as I've said, is that if you are doing things that are kind of the opposite, kind of like making your brain operate in these like little fits and starts, so you're constantly trying to like get back on task, it's really dissatisfying and frustrating. It will make you very frustrated. So I've leaned on this idea in some of the other work that I've done. For example, I'm trying to remember which of the studies it was. It might have been one of the EEG studies where we had our data and our findings kind of reviewed by a psychologist who didn't work on this study. And we were like, well, why do you think that this is? And his theory, which is in the appendix of the study, is that our brains operate on glucose, and we use glucose throughout the day. And when we get things like hangry or, we made too many decisions over the course of the day. Like we're familiar, probably most of us, with that feeling of coming home from a busy day at work. And it's like, what am I going to have for dinner? I don't know. Like you can't make a decision anymore. Yeah. You do, like, you just lost it.
Right.
And so his theory is that when our brains are constantly having to come back on task, it's forcing these extra little spurts of glucose that are making you have to kind of make the choice to come back on task. And we get frustrated because it's basically our brain's way of telling us, hey, you're using glucose at an unsustainable rate. You need to stop this like right now. This is really dangerous.
That's
like
interesting.
I'm going to starve and die. So I thought that was like really, really an interesting way to think about it as well. So for me, it kind of comes back to first principles of like how much of this is hardwired and how much of this hardwiring is actually physiological. So you can't say, oh, well, people will get used to this, or we'll train our brains to be different. Like our brains don't train to be different over a lifetime. Like
Yeah.
maybe, our descendants, 200 years from now will have different brains that allow them to use, sputtery technology better, but
Yeah.
it's not going to happen in one lifetime.
Yeah. I think it's so cool that you got somebody else to come in and audit or give that, unbiased opinion on the work.
Yeah. Well,
Like
it's
I'm trying to
necessary.
think
Yeah.
of I'm just thinking, like in my day to day, like how often do I actually get somebody who is out of how often do I get somebody in my day to day work to look at what I've done and
Right.
review it? I don't know. There's something about getting that external feedback that I think is fascinating. Maybe.
Well, it's very satisfying when you've gotten it, but it's really nerve wracking until you get it because basically, we like part of the process when you do this type of research is you do have to send it away and get it vetted. And it's like, what if they say that there was some kind of error in how we did our research or something like that, and we just
Mm.
spent like tens of thousands of dollars on a project that is kind of like So
Yeah, like
it's
could you imagine redesigning a website and spending months working on it and then launching it and all of a sudden it's slower and somebody tells you did a bad job?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and it's funny because I was just thinking about this morning, and I was thinking I would be really curious to see a survey result, like how many people working on websites today or apps um, does any kind of usability testing.
What's the usability test? I've never done that.
Yeah, that's the thing, right? And like it was a hard sell 20 years ago, and I don't think it's gotten easier. Like I think, the desire to build new features and things like that is far outpaces or outstrips people's desire to slow down and test what they're doing.
Tell me about it.
Mhm. Bummer Thoughts
Oh man.
2000.
Bring it on. I'm here for it. See, one of the things that fascinates me, picking off of this, what smooth segue off of having somebody else come in and audit your work is, I mean, performance feels like it's been, maybe it's not just, has it objectively been a niche topic for years? And it feels like anytime I want to evaluate the performance of my work, I need an expert. I need to get somebody else's opinion. I need to go ask Tammy, hey, Tammy, can you look at my site? Did I do a good job here? I don't really know how to do this myself. Is my experience unique in that way? Or I feel like you talk to a lot of people. Maybe it's
Yeah.
like, what's it like out there? Is that what performance is for people? That now you need to go get an expert, come talk to you,
It's
or
kind of yeah, I absolutely get that. I mean, the world that I live in now, like working at Speed Curve, and this isn't going to turn into a product shill or anything like that, is like that's kind of what the point and what tools are supposed to do for you is they are meant to be that validator. So, you know, the very hand wavy sort of, solution is okay, well, figure out what metrics you need to focus on, get a tool that lets you track those metrics over time, and, set thresholds or performance budgets or whatever you want to call them against kind of your current, kind of status quo, and make sure you don't regress.
Mhm.
And then kind of have some goals and things like that you want to get to that might be based on industry case studies or benchmarking yourself against your competitors. So the tools can do all these things, but kind of the flip side of that, and also there are consultants out there. Like we have a consulting practice at SpeedCurve. There's lots of really good independent consultants out there who can help you get set up with the tools, teach you about all of this, validate your work, let you know what you can still focus on, all that kind of thing. But I think the thing that's challenging now, that's different from 10 years ago, is on one hand, the tools are better and there are better metrics. So that's really great. And a lot more people are using real user monitoring, which is like basically actually measuring performance kind of in the wild and actually like measuring, how people engage with their sites, but also how their sites perform out there in the real world,
Yeah.
alongside synthetic testing, which is like simulating how your pages would perform in different contexts and on different browsers and things like that. So the tools are definitely more sophisticated. The metrics are much more nuanced, which is great. But alongside that, just means it's that much harder to learn. So I feel like we've solved one problem and kind of necessarily by doing that created a new problem. So when I think of like challenges in web performance right now, it's just teaching people how to use the tools. And kind of a corollary to that is the people who want to learn how to use the tools, they're excited. They kind of get that this is really important, but the tools require an investment of time and money because, the good ones definitely cost some money, but more importantly, they cost time. Like onboarding to use a new tool that you want to have be integral to your organization is a big deal. Like the money is almost incidental. It's like when somebody when you go to get a dog or a cat and like it costs that much to get a dog or cat, and it's like if you think the upfront cost is the biggest investment in getting a dog or a cat, you shouldn't get a dog or a cat. It's kind of the same way with any kind of actual important tool.
Right.
Like your real investment is in the time that you're going to spend getting really good value out of it. So before those people who want to use the tool can invest in the tool, they've got to convince other people in their organization who don't know about web performance, don't care about web performance, or feel like, oh, we're probably fast enough. We're about the same as everybody else. They've got to get them to care. So there's this whole kind of like daisy chain of effects where it's, teaching people to teach other people how to care about performance is a big part of what I do as my day-to-day job.
I have so many of these moments where I want to like jump in and just dive off onto some complete tangent. I'm going to cut this, but I came really close to going, oh, and time is money. Am I right? Okay. but
yeah.
Maybe I'll throw that in there anyways.
Thanks.
But so let's, I'm going to wrestle this back into stories here. Help connect a little bit for me. I've got Strange Loop 2009. And I've got Speed Curve today. How did you get from one to the other? What was the journey in between?
Oh, for me?
Yeah.
Okay, now I have to really think.
Here we go.
So it's kind of like, like just working in tech. It's a little bit of a tale of like acquisitions and happenstance, like kind of just doing this. So
like, were you in through that whole Strange Loop, Radware, Sosta? And then who acquired Sosta? Akamai?
Akamai acquired Sosta, but at the time, I kind of had they were lovely. They invited me to join Akamai as well. But I'm also very good friends with Steve Souders and Mark Zeman, who are the basically partners of SpeedCurve. And when I had an opportunity at the same time to join SpeedCurve, it was like, how do you say no to working with Steve and Mark? It's like
Steve Souders, the man himself.
Yeah. So for your audience who might not know who Steve is, like some people kind of jokingly, but not jokingly, call him the godfather of web performance. So he's kind of the reason why a lot of us have jobs and why a lot of these tools exist. Like he wrote the original web performance books, like explaining the rules as they were back in like 2006.
2007. We got
Are you going to go to your library?
I got to do this. This is like my parlor trick that I can just pull books out of the air.
Nice.
Like, oh, you mean this one? You mean
that would be there? Yeah.
Yep. And don't worry, there's even faster websites on the show.
There's a sequel, yeah. So, and Steve, worked at Yahoo and then at Google, and he led web performance in both those places. Did some of the earliest work on RUM, like real user monitoring, that's out there. And so really kind of like has set the stage for a lot of things. And he was like a co-chair of O'Reilly Velocity, which was a long-running conference that was around web performance. So, and he's just one of those like connector people. He just knows everybody and tries to really like make the tent as big as it needs to be so that everybody can be inside it. So he and Mark are wonderful. So I had to come to SpeedCurve. So really happy that I did.
Around what time is that?
So, it's actually coming up on 6 years in 23.
Happy anniversary.
Yeah, 2017.
Wow.
So long ago. And it's the longest I've ever worked at the same company, which is kind of it. Well, it's tech. Like 1 year is actually 3 years. So,
but that's a pretty cool, I guess, superlative there. Like, It seems like there must be something special going on at Speed Curve then. If it's the place that Tammy stayed the longest, like this
Yeah.
place
So
kept your
so
interest.
in fairness, I will say, like, I'm going to touch wood here. I have been very, very lucky, hashtag blessed, to have in my entire like working life, I've worked at really great places with great people.
Yeah.
So I've not had like a scarring, terrible tech experience or like any bad
No
bosses. So I've
war
like
stories.
great bosses, great coworkers everywhere I've been. So some of my shorter kind of durations at different companies are because they got acquired or something happened, and so I really just kind of like went from one company to the other company, and so those were actually big spans of time. But no, Speed Curve is really special. Like, we're a small team, everybody has tons of experience, very flat kind of organization, a lot of autonomy, and everybody cares about web performance like a lot. So
Yeah.
we spent, I mean, a lot of other teams could say the same thing. So I don't, we're
But
not
it's literally what you guys do.
it's literally, but it's like what we do. Like, we have conversations about metrics that are like impassioned and like,
I picture. Is there ever a standoff between you two, like the group standing on tables and shouting at each other?
no,
Like,
no, it's we're all really nice. So that's really helpful. It's
nice
more just
but passionate.
we get excited and we start talking over each other in Zoom calls, and I just like, "And what if we did?" So, but fortunately, Mark and Steve keep us really focused,
That's good.
and yeah, so it's just like we really care about performance. We come from really diverse backgrounds. So Mark's background, and he's somebody you might want to consider interviewing as well, because he actually comes from a design and agency background.
Yeah, that's me
He
too.
built Speed Curve on top of Web Page Test because he was using Web Page Test to show things to his clients, because he wanted his clients to understand that the sites they built, it wasn't just about having them look really pretty, which he's good at doing, but
Right.
it was about having them actually be very fast and performant. So he was using Web Page Test a lot, but he wanted a different interface or different outputs because everything needs to be a bit glossier and things like that. And so he built kind of the first iteration of Speed Curve to do that, and then partnered with Steve and kind of helped build on a lot more nuance and things like that. So that was kind of the forking that happened with Pat Meenan, Web Page Test founders,
Mhm.
blessing. And Pat's been really instrumental in helping us and make our tools better as well. So
Yeah.
yeah.
So they start this thing, and then at some point they call in Tammy. They say, "Tammy, we don't know anything about digital publishing. Can you write content for us?" Or was it? Did you get the pitch, or what was the pitch this time? How'd you get roped in?
Well, we knew each other through Velocity. So I had been to a bunch of Velocity conferences, and so had Mark and Steve. And so, kind of one of the things that I love about going to the same conferences, I'm kind of an introvert.
Mhm.
But after you've sort of seen the same people, like, a few years in a row, it's a little bit like summer camp. And
Yeah.
so even an introvert will start to feel like, oh, I kind of belong here. This is good. I think these are my people. And so that's how I met them. I did a talk at Velocity, and Mark has spoken at Velocity, and Christy was the co-chair. So that's how I met them. So I was kind of, I guess, the employee one at Speed Curve, which is usually with like, this is sort of my experience. It's like company, builds a really good product, and then they need a content person.
Yeah.
And then yeah, if I'm lucky, I get called to do that.
Wow. So I just want to know, like, what was it? You come into this new thing, Speed Curve.
Mhm.
It's this tool on top of web page tests. Like, what do you start writing? What are you doing? Do you come up with all these ideas and just pump it out there? Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
The tricky thing is just finding, I think everybody can relate to this, like trying to find time to make content, because
Mm.
when I first started at Speed Curve, kind of what I knew, what I came in knowing how to do, because I'd been doing it pretty much exclusively at the previous places I'd worked, was just writing articles, doing interviews, talking about performance, doing research, and that kind of thing. So it was very much kind of in the research, content, speaking at conferences kind of vein.
Mhm.
And so, I still do that at Speed Curve. But what my job has kind of morphed into, and I'm actually really glad that it has, because I think that's one of the things that I think at this point, when I've been doing the same thing for so long, same things for so long, it's you need to kind of have a little bit more, augmented with a little bit more, is I talk to a lot of customers.
Yeah.
So previously I was kind of in this research and writing bit of an ivory tower. Whereas now, like I talk to people, I talk to hundreds of speaker customers a year at like really big companies and small companies. And I kind of like, I show them how to use our tools and I talk about what their performance issues are. And it's really educational. Like you realize just what the actual pain points are. And there are a lot of them are kind of cultural and organizational as well as kind of technical.
Yeah.
And it gives you just a lot of empathy for people, like kind of what they're going through and the fact that the problems don't really change. So that's been really great. So I do a lot of talking to customers now.
Yeah.
And on top of everything else. So it really has influenced how I create content, but also just how I think about performance.
Yeah. Well, how so? What are some of the ways? Count the ways. Are there any things that come to mind when you think of, I think it's interesting that you said, I used to be in an ivory tower writing my articles, and now I talk to people. How has it changed the way you think about performance? How has it changed you? How has talking to people changed you?
So one of the things that I've realized is that if I were still in the ivory tower, I think I would have assumed that everyone is on more or less the same trajectory and knows more or less the same things about performance.
Mm-hmm.
And what I've learned from talking to people is that at any given time, a huge chunk of people are new to this. So very smart people who are learning everything for the very first time. And so I've learned that I think if I didn't have this knowledge and this like firsthand like awareness, I would probably be like deeper in jargon land than I am. And it's something that, it's really, you have to really fight when you've been doing anything technical for a while, is just like this kind of accretion of assumptions and jargon that you've so internalized that it doesn't sound like jargon to you anymore. And so even now, like where I really strongly subscribe to plain language and plain writing and, in everything that I do, I'll still catch myself like, I just said a thing that probably didn't mean anything to whoever heard it. And I had to catch myself and go back and explain things. And so a big part of being in my world and talking to people is just always sticking with first principles and making everything as simple as possible. And it's not because people are stupid, it's because people are new.
Right.
So I'm just trying to kind of take the frustration out of learning about this to make it easier and faster for people to onboard themselves. So yeah, that's a big thing for me. And so I'm always kind of going through our support docs. Like we have a really good support hub at Speak Curve, and kind of just like what's missing, like what's the thing that we're not explaining, or how could we be explaining this better? And I'm not the only person at Speak Curve who feels that way. Like we're all pretty big proponents of easy UI, easy copy, just like how can we, and it's a product. It's just a smart thing to build ease into your product. It kind of sounds like a no-brainer, but just as a human being who, recognizes the humanity in other people, I just don't want to, I want to help.
Yeah.
I want to make life easier for people.
Yeah. Yep. I'm particularly interested in words and the ways that we talk about performance. I, in addition to my book Parlor Trick, I also like collecting metaphors or analogies about how we describe performance. I feel like you said one earlier. I may have missed it, but like I've been trying to keep a list of the different ways I describe performance. One of the first ones I go to is like, this is how a car works. What if you were in a restaurant? I recently started doing sports analogies for performance. So I'm curious in your digging up, or what's the word for getting rid of accretion? It's like as you're
dissolving.
Yeah. As you're tilling the soil of your language, like what words do you catch yourself saying, and how are you replacing them to make sense to other people?
I think I don't know about like other terms. Like what
have you caught yourself recently this moment that you described where you said, I've had to catch myself. They probably didn't understand what I said.
Yeah. So talking about the tools, like
Hmm.
I'll say like, oh, it's just synthetic testing. And a lot of people don't know what synthetic testing is, or real user monitoring, RUM.
Hmm.
We throw out these acronyms. Um, the metrics are probably a big one, like, because sometimes we get so caught up in like what the metrics are teaching us that we don't think to slow down and explain what the metrics actually are.
Hmm.
So for like thinking about core web vitals, for example, like, it's a set of three metrics that Google is popularizing, and they've made, kind of part of how they measure user experience. And as our, they're also a ranking factor for search, for search ranking. So these three core web vitals are now kind of on a lot of people's tongues. If you're an SEO person or a marketing person and a performance person, so that's really nice.
Hmm.
And I applaud that effort for sure. But what the web vitals are first contentful pain, or sorry, largest contentful pain, first input delay, and cumulative layout shift. And we kind of, LCP, FID, FID, or CLS. And
Yep.
suddenly everybody's talking about CLS and FID. And, if you're new to that and you're
Yep.
just hearing it, it really just, it's just,
Disorienting.
it's just letter salad. Like, it doesn't mean anything. And so
It's
it's
a
kind of
good
like, okay,
TLA.
yeah, another TLA, 3-letter acronym. So just kind of saying like, oh, okay, well, large contentful pain. It's just like, what's the most meaningful content?
Mhm.
How is that rendering? And cumulative layout shift is like, how janky is your page? And first input delay is just like, how quickly does the page respond? Or, that, like, so those types of things, like
Mhm.
actually making sure that we're talking about metrics in terms that people can actually understand and um, feel they can trust, or feel that they're actually relevant.
Mhm.
I think that um, I think that for me, like coming from a usability background, I like the fact that metrics exist. I think metrics are a really heroic attempt to apply proxies to human behavior.
Mhm.
But it's really easy to lose sight of the fact that they're just proxies. And the only way to actually measure human behavior is if you were to follow every one of your users around and watch them use your app,
Yep.
and measure how they use your app and see what page, like, having seen this in a lab, like, I know that what you learn in a lab is so profoundly more nuanced than what you're going to learn from a number in a spreadsheet or on a chart.
Yep.
So labs help teach you empathy and kind of really internalize empathy for users. Numbers on a chart don't. And the problem with empathy, as I've kind of said in a few talks, is it doesn't really scale well.
Mm.
So it's like, the idea of numbers on a chart is really, really abstract from an actual person using your site. And you've got to constantly work to recognize that your number is helpful, but it's not real in the sense
Yeah.
that,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? It's just an aggregated bunch of numbers that is giving you a general sense of a trend.
Mhm.
Um, and I think it's safe to say that and still be a proponent of using these tools,
Right.
because they're the best thing we have. They're the only thing we have. And it's better to use them than nothing, because if you use nothing, I mean, there's a reason why companies that invest in performance, companies that use tools, tend to perform better than companies that don't. If you look at companies that are like large companies that are currently struggling, and you can, find, I'm not going to name any names, but this is kind of the kind of thing I kind of track on the side out of interest, because there's a business component to all this as well. Like, I care about users, but I get that to, get other people to care about users, we have to convince them that this actually affects their business.
Mhm.
If you look at companies that are hurting financially right now, companies that are in receivership or whatever,
Mhm.
you could say, oh, it's the economy, blah, blah, blah. Except that we also know that so many companies in this economy are doing really, really, really well. And one of the biggest differentiators between the companies that are doing well and the companies that aren't doing well, if you were to do a bunch of synthetic tests through any publicly available synthetic testing tool and create your own kind of benchmarks dashboard, pick the 10 best performing companies financially and pick the worst 10 performing companies financially that you can find and measure the performance synthetically of some of their homepage and a few key product pages or whatever, you would see, as I've seen, that the slower sites are the ones that are struggling. Like it matters.
Oh man, we're going to get off on a whole nother thing about correlation now. Let's talk about correlation, Tammy.
Oh boy.
Oh man.
Yeah. So correlation charts, I mean, are something that we do at Speed Curve.
Yeah.
And you can do them in other RUM tools. So correlation charts are a really great way to and we call them correlation charts for a reason, because we're not trying to say there's a cause and effect here. But what a correlation chart can show you is how the performance metrics for your site correlate to user engagement metrics like bounce rate or time on page or things like that, session length, or cart size or conversion rate or whatever it is you're tracking for your real users. And so what we typically see in correlation charts is that if you, depending on your page, but or depending on your site, what metrics you're tracking, often performance does correlate. Like the faster cohorts of users have higher conversion rates or lower bounce rates, that sort of thing. And I've created a gazillion charts that show this mostly. And there's always going to be some exceptions, but the trend is it mostly shows this. So yeah, there's a really high correlation factor as well. If you want to do more of a actual testing this to see how it actually plays out on your own site, because I wouldn't rely on a correlation chart. I mean, they're helpful if you are trying to teach people in your company, like, look, there's a correlation here. Like we should care about this and it merits more investigation. But if you actually want to see the impact of performance changes on your business metrics, then you need to do like an A/B test or a multivariate test where it's kind of what I was talking about earlier with the usability studies. You need to, and we used to do this at Strange Loop as well. We, if our customers wanted to, is you optimize most of your traffic and then you don't optimize like a small cohort of your traffic. And it's the same site. Just one is optimized, one is the other. Same site, it looks the same. It's just one is slower, one is faster. And you could see it every time we did this type of A/B testing. In fact, some of our customers were like, "Okay, stop it. We get it." Like, there's supposed to be a 12-week test, and they would stop it after 2 weeks because they realized how much money they were losing. Right. So you can probably if you do an A/B test, see that this affects your business as well.
Man, I am so sad that our time is coming short.
Oh,
because I have a million other things that I want to talk about. Tammy, it has been an absolute pleasure. I would love if we could wrap up here in the last minute or two. Like, you have any parting words of wisdom? Maybe something you would give your Strange Loop self, some words of comfort or wisdom. And then after that, how can people follow you? Stay up to date.
Oh, yeah.
Know what's going on in the world of Tammy.
So parting words of wisdom. I think the reason why so many people are still doing web performance, 10, 15 years down the road is because it feels like it's this onion that you just has infinite layers that you can peel. And I think it's fascinating. And the metrics keep evolving and the tools keep getting better and our understanding of user behavior keeps evolving. So it's just not static. And that can be frustrating in some ways for people who are just like, I just want it to stay still so I can measure it. But as somebody who works in this space, it's really, really interesting. And I advise people to, keep pursuing it if you're just getting started. There's also like lots of great people in this space. So I would say, people are really awesome as well. Find the thing that you care about. That's kind of like that's your main thing. And that makes you feel passionate about this. And I think that there's something in that for everyone. I think that Where I feel really lucky is that the thing that I care about, which is mostly just user experience, actually everybody does care about. Like,
Yeah.
the most technical person, it doesn't just love spreadsheets and numbers. They want to see how it connects to actual human beings as well. Because at the end of the day, we all want to feel like our work actually has benefit, like it's helping in some way. What was the? Oh my goodness, what was that show? I'm totally drawing a blank. It was about web performance. It was the comedy. Takes place in Silicon.
Is it Silicon Valley?
It's Silicon Valley. Yeah, that's it.
It took place somewhere, and I
Oh,
can't recall.
what was it? So I actually did watch the show religiously. I thought it was pretty funny, and it was like, wow, they made a sitcom about web performance. How weird is that? And the
Mhm.
guy who's the main character, Thomas Middleditch, plays the main character. He's actually from the town that I live in, Nelson, which
No.
is pretty neat. Yeah, it's like this little ski town in BC. He's from here.
Amazing.
So, anyways, but they always would say like, "We're here to make the world better." Every tech company was basically saying, "We're here to make the world better." So I think we all do kind of want to make the world better, and so seeing yourself as like kind of a somebody who's part of that is really helpful. And where people can find me, so I don't know if people are still using Twitter. It's like at Tam Everts,
Yeah. Well,
TAMEVERT.
we'll see when this gets published, where things are at.
But I'm on LinkedIn too, of course. And then there's also a Mastodon called webperf.social.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm there and I'm just at Tammy .webperf.social.
Well, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
Tammy, thank you so much for coming on the show
Thank
today.
you.
It's been a blast talking. I would love to keep talking another 7 hours. But maybe someday, maybe if I'm lucky enough, I'll get to see you at one of these conferences.
Yeah.
Well, until then, thanks.
All right.
Until next time.
Bye.